Welcome to the debate. I want to start today by taking us back about 500 years to a small, dusty village in Hungary called Koch. The locals there were brilliant wheelwrights, and they built this horse-drawn carriage that was, lighter, faster, more comfortable than anything else on the roads. They called it a coachy. It was a literal vehicle designed for one specific purpose: to transport important people from where they were to where they needed to be. And today, that word coach has evolved from a noun into a verb, and from a wooden vehicle into this massive global industry of human development. We see it everywhere, from the sidelines of the Super Bowl to the boardrooms of the Fortune 500 and, well, increasingly in our Instagram feeds offering to fix our lives.
So the central question we're wrestling with today is whether this evolution represents the maturation of a legitimate scientific discipline, or if the wheels have come off the wagon entirely.
It is a romantic bit of history, I'll give you that. But let's be honest about the modern reality. When we talk about coaching today, outside of, say, professional sports, we aren't usually talking about a distinct science. We're looking at a booming, chaotic marketplace. You have business coaches, sure, but you also have life coaches, wellness coaches, dating coaches, mind, body, soul coaches. My argument is that this explosion isn't a sign of professional maturity. It's a sign of a regulatory vacuum. We are looking at an industry that is effectively an unregulated meta-profession that often blurs the ethical lines of therapy and, quite frankly, monetizes basic human friendship.
I think that's the cynical view. And while I understand where it comes from, I think it misses the forest for the trees. I'm here to argue that coaching, true coaching, is a vital, distinct, and evidence-based developmental process. It fills a massive gap in our social fabric. It isn't mentoring and it isn't therapy. It has an intellectual pedigree that goes back to Oxford and Cambridge, and when it's applied correctly, specifically in areas like ADHD management or executive strategy, it offers a utility that is measurable and profound. It's the architecture of future potential, whereas I would argue therapy is often the archaeology of past trauma.
Architecture of potential is a beautiful phrase, but let's look at the foundation of that building. If you want to be a counseling psychologist in the state of California, do you know what you need? You need a doctorate. You need 3,000 hours of supervised professional experience. You need to pass rigorous exams. If you want to be a life coach in California, you need a printer to make a business card. There is no licensure. There is no oversight body with any actual legal teeth. My position is that without these barriers to entry, you cannot claim to be a profession. You're a gig economy worker selling advice. And when that advice touches on mental health, which it inevitably does, that lack of training becomes dangerous.
Okay, the barrier to entry argument is the low-hanging fruit here. Yes, the title coach is unprotected. Anyone can call themselves a coach, just like anyone can call themselves an artist or a consultant. But that doesn't invalidate the discipline itself. We need to define what coaching actually is before we dismiss it, and I think the source material makes a really critical distinction here. Coaching is not mentoring. Mentoring is usually informal, a long-term relationship where a senior person gives general life advice. Coaching is different. It's a development form where an experienced person supports a client in achieving a specific personal or professional goal. The operative word there is specific. It focuses on tasks, objectives, and training.
But where does that methodology actually come from? You mentioned Oxford earlier. Are you really drawing a straight line from 19th century academics to a modern wellness guru running a seminar in a hotel ballroom?
I am drawing a line to the roots of the practice, yes, because I think the intellectual history matters. The term coach was first used in Oxford University slang around 1830. It described a tutor who carried a student through an exam, referencing that Hungarian carriage metaphor again. But look at Cambridge. From 1780 to 1909, they ran the mathematical tripos. This was a grueling, high-stakes contest of mathematical problem-solving that could define a young man's entire career. Students were known as wranglers, and they hired mathematical coaches. These coaches weren't just teaching math. They were training the student to win a specific cognitive contest under immense pressure. That is the DNA of modern coaching: performance optimization.
I appreciate the history lesson, but I think you're cherry-picking the prestigious roots and ignoring the weeds. The source material explicitly links modern coaching to the human potential movement of the 1960s and large group awareness training like Erhard's seminars training, EST. These weren't academic institutions. They were controversial, highly commercialized self-help movements that often use these confrontational tactics to break people down. That is just as much a part of the lineage at the Cambridge tutor. And that DNA, the commercialization of self-help, is what we see dominating the industry today, not the academic rigor of the University of Sydney.
The human potential movement is part of the ancestry, certainly, but you can't ignore the formalization that has happened since then. You mentioned the University of Sydney. They offered the world's first coaching psychology unit of study in January 2000. We now have the Institute of Coaching at McLean Hospital, a Harvard Medical School affiliate. We're seeing a convergence of adult education, leadership studies, and psychology. The methodology has moved beyond, tough love EST tactics to targeted communication skills, active listening, restatements, and Socratic questioning to shift perspective. It's a meta-profession because these skills are transferable mechanisms that work whether you're coaching a CEO or an athlete.
I struggle with the term meta-profession. To me, it sounds like a euphemism for unregulated scope. A profession is usually defined by what it cannot do as much as what it can. Doctors can't practice law. Lawyers can't perform surgery. Coaches seem to feel they can operate anywhere. But let's look at where the rubber meets the road. You claim this is evidence-based, so let's talk about efficacy. Where is the proof that this works better than, just talking to a smart friend?
Well, the strongest data comes from the business sector, where the ROI is scrutinized because companies don't like throwing money away. Executive coaching has transitioned from a remedial tool, fixing the broken manager, to a high-performance perk. Research reviews indicate positive effects on workplace performance, stress reduction, career transition. It's about developing executive presence and strategic thinking. But honestly, if you want the most compelling evidence, look at the realm of neurodiversity, specifically ADHD coaching.
Okay, I'm listening.
This concept was introduced by psychiatrists Edward Hallowell and John Rady in their seminal 1994 book, Driven to Distraction. They identified that for people with ADHD, the primary deficit isn't intelligence. It's executive function, organizing, planning, time perception. An ADHD coach acts as an external prefrontal cortex. They are a mirror for self-awareness. They don't analyze your childhood, they help you build workarounds. The source notes that people with ADHD brain wiring often need this external structure to realize their potential. This is a specific, targeted intervention that medication alone often doesn't solve. It's the transportation metaphor in action, moving the client from chaos to order.
I will concede that ADHD coaching represents the strongest argument for the field. And you know why? Because the goal is functional and measurable. Did I finish the project? Did I organize my day? However, you are using the best-case scenario to defend the worst-case industry. For every trained ADHD coach, there are thousands of financial coaches or general life coaches. And the source material explicitly mentions that while early research on financial coaching suggests links to debt reduction, it says, and I'm quoting here, much more rigorous analysis is necessary before any causal linkages can be established. You cannot use the success of ADHD protocols to validate a financial coach who might just be a failed accountant giving bad advice.
Every field has a spectrum of maturity. Medicine was bloodletting before it was antibiotics. Coaching is young, but to say it's just bad advice ignores the structural shift in corporate culture. Many organizations now expect their senior leaders to act as coaches for their own teams. It's not just an external consultant coming in, it's an internal cultural shift toward performance. The manager as coach is a standard expectation now.
But that muddies the water even further. The source notes that many business coaches refer to themselves as consultants because the scope is so broad. And if a manager is coaching their direct report, is that a confidential developmental relationship or is it just performance management? The lack of standardization makes the data incredibly noisy. If we can't even agree on what coaching is in a boardroom, how can we scientifically say it works? Most of the feedback is anecdotal. I liked talking to Bob, so Bob is a good coach. That's satisfaction. That's not science.
It goes beyond satisfaction. We use 360-degree feedback, behavioral assessments, psychometrics. We're measuring behavioral change, not just feelings. But I do want to pivot to your concern about the danger zone. You mentioned that the lack of regulation creates risk.
It creates a massive boundary problem. This is the coaching conundrum. We're talking about the overlap between coaching and therapy. Life coaching deals with topics like fear of failure, imposter syndrome, relationship struggles, confidence. If I walk into a clinical psychologist's office with those complaints, they are assessing me for anxiety, depression, or trauma histories. A life coach treats these same symptoms with what? Empowerment, manifesting. The source notes that critics see life coaching as akin to psychotherapy, but without the legal restrictions.
I think the distinction is clearer than you suggest, though. I admit bad actors exist. The standard distinction is that therapy is archaeological. It digs into the past to understand why a patient is suffering or broken. It treats pathology. Coaching is architectural. It assumes the client is whole and capable, and it focuses on building the future. It transports you from point A to point B. It focuses on the how, not the why.
That sounds clean in a textbook, but in a session, human beings don't compartmentalize their how from their why. If a client can't move from point A to point B because of unresolved trauma, and an untrained coach tries to push through using accountability tactics, that can be re-traumatizing. The National Society of Health Coaches tries to draw a line. Health coaches guide those with chronic conditions. Wellness coaches guide otherwise healthy individuals. But who diagnoses otherwise healthy? The coach? They aren't qualified to make that determination.
That is a risk, and that is why the International Coach Federation and others emphasize referring clients to therapy when red flags appear. But we are also seeing a professionalizing of the ethics. In 2016, the Association for Coaching and the European Mentoring and Coaching Council launched a global code of ethics. Signatories bind themselves to standards.
A voluntary code of ethics is like a voluntary speed limit. It's a nice suggestion for honest people. But because these bodies are not regulators, you don't have to belong to them to practice. The ethics are legally unenforceable. If a psychologist violates ethics, they lose their license and their livelihood. If a coach violates ethics, they just change their website copy. The source explicitly says ethics are variable, and this lack of regulation leads to niche markets that feel, well, predatory.
Predatory or just responsive? Look at the rise of Christian coaching or dating coaching. A Christian coach integrates a biblical worldview with goal setting. A dating coach helps with social signaling and confidence. These aren't medical issues, they're life strategy issues. If the market demands support for specific life strategies, why shouldn't a profession exist to provide it? Traditional therapy often avoids giving direct advice or strategy. Coaching fills that gap.
Because the market isn't always rational and it's easily exploited. And this brings us to the structure of the industry itself. The source material highlights a very uncomfortable reality. Most life coaches in the U.S. find relatively low demand for their services. It's a saturated market.
It's competitive, like acting or photography.
It's not just competitive. It's cannibalistic. Critics suggest that the most profitable area of the field isn't coaching clients, it's training other coaches. It is an industry that feeds on its own tail. You have people looking for purpose, so they pay thousands of dollars for a certification from a private company. They graduate, find no clients, and then realize the only way to make money is to sell business coaching to the next batch of hopefuls. When an industry grows by feeding on new entrants rather than serving end users, that is a structural flaw. It risks becoming a pyramid, where the product is the certificate, not the outcome.
I think that's a cynical view that focuses on the get-rich-quick fringe rather than the core profession. Training exists in every industry. And I want to counter your point about low demand or lack of utility by pointing to the sheer breadth of legitimate applications listed in the material. We aren't just talking about vague life coaching. We're talking about areas like esports.
Video games? You're using video games to defend the profession?
Absolutely. Look at the League of Legends World Championship. The head coach there is responsible for planning game strategies, managing the pick and ban phases, and handling player development under immense psychological pressure. This isn't a paid friend. This is a tactician. Or look at vocal coaches. They aren't singing teachers, they are performance partners helping a singer prepare for a tour. Writing coaches help journalists with productivity and structure. These are valid, technical, process-driven roles.
I will grant you that. When the domain is technical, singing, sports, esports, the role of the coach is clear. The transportation metaphor works because the destination is clear. Win the game, hit the high note, finish the book. My objection is specifically anchored to where the destination is vague. Be happier. Be more confident. When the destination is vague, the lack of regulation becomes a minefield. The source mentions mind, body, soul coaches and trauma healing. If an unregulated coach attempts trauma healing without clinical training, they are playing with fire.
I agree that trauma healing should remain the domain of clinicians, but I believe the industry is self-correcting. The rise of coaching psychology as an academic field, the existence of the Global Code of Ethics, the integration of coaching into standard HR practices, these are all signs of a profession growing up, not a scam falling apart. We're even seeing a convergence where some coaches are also licensed psychologists, offering the best of both worlds.
It's growing up very slowly, and in the meantime, the consumer is the guinea pig. We have names for people who help with deep emotional processing: psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers. We don't need a new, unregulated name for it just because it sounds trendier on a business card.
But we do need a name for the person who helps you optimize, strategize, and execute. That is not the role of a therapist. We've illuminated the complexity here. From my perspective, coaching is a powerful, flexible modality that fills a necessary gap between education, mentoring, and therapy. Whether it's helping an ADHD brain organize its day or helping an executive reduce stress and build a team, the transportation metaphor from the Village of Coaches holds true. It moves people. The lack of regulation is a sign of a booming, evolving profession, not a failed one.
And I maintain that while specific applications like sports, vocal training, or perhaps even executive strategy are valid, the broader life coaching and wellness industries remain ethically murky. Without licensure, without standardized training like the 3,000 hours required for psychologists, the consumer is unprotected. The line between professional support and a paid friend, or worse, an amateur therapist, remains uncomfortably thin.
I think we can agree on this. If you're looking for a coach, look for credentials, look for specific expertise, and know exactly what vehicle you're trying to board.
Absolutely. Determine if you need a mentor, a therapist, or truly a coach. And if it's a coach, make sure they actually know how to drive.
That's all for this edition of The Debate. Thank you for listening.